Hello everyone, I am the Weather Dude. Welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about Tropical Storm Idalia, which is a very strong tropical storm closing in on hurricane strength, in fact. So we're going to go through the storm at length, where it's going to go, who's going to get the impacts, how strong or how intense will the impacts be. All these questions will be answered in today's video. So of course, be sure to like and subscribe, as well as ring the bell notifications so you do not miss another video. And we're just going to get right into it here. Starting off with the satellite imagery, and it shows a storm that is starting to develop. You can really see that convection that is building near the low pressure center. Now, I know what you're thinking. It does look a bit raggedy. It's been putting off a little bit of shear today, all right? But the shear is dwindling. The strength of the wind shear is dwindling, but it nonetheless has had to put up with some wind shear. And you can sort of tell by how the thunderstorms are off to the south, right? Which means it's been dealing with a little bit of wind shear coming from the north. It's not particularly strong, but again, when this is only a tropical storm, it doesn't take much wind shear to kind of knock one of these things out. Right? If it was dealing with the same level of wind shear and let's say it was a Category 4 hurricane, we'd be looking at a different picture right now. All right, but there still is nonetheless developing and flaring up convection around the center, and that's still good news for the storm. And regardless of the shear, there's been some outflow that's been trying to get out from the storm, right? So it's building, it's still breathing, right? It's literally still sitting east of the Yucatan Peninsula. Pretty much hasn't moved here for at least like a few days, almost a couple of days more like. So it's just been sitting there and spinning up and over that warm water, and it is now a 65 mile per hour tropical storm. We're going to get into the National Hurricane Center advisories in just a second. So you can really see on the visible satellite where that big flare up of thunderstorms was. And I guarantee there's probably some winds of at least 70 miles an hour at the surface in those thunderstorms, because that's a big flare up of thunderstorm activity. You can even see again some of these outflow bands. You can really see on the visible satellite where those are going right there. But you can also kind of see where that wind is kind of starting to come in, right? That wind shear aloft that's been temporarily hurting the system. So what is new? I did want to wait to do this video for the 11 a.m. major advisory. Of course, the next major advisory comes out at 5, but there will be an intermediate one at 2, and these are all Eastern time, by the way. So you can see this came out at 10 a.m. Central, 11 a.m. Eastern. Now, what's new is there are now hurricane warnings, because it is now the hurricane, of course, is going to be approaching rather sooner. I believe a watch is issued if hurricane conditions will be impact your region within 48 hours. I believe a warning is within 36, if I'm not mistaken. So now that we're within that time frame, that window, now it's going to be here 7 a.m. Wednesday, which is less than 2 days away, and they'll be allowed to issue hurricane warnings. Pretty much from about Cedar Key down towards even like Tampa, and I believe just down to Sarasota. And even down in southwestern Florida, we have hurricane watches, tropical storm warnings, and Apalachicola even has a hurricane watch and a tropical storm warning. And of course, hurricane warnings for Cuba, western Cuba, as this storm is strengthening right now. You can also see more evidence of the shear is, again, see how the tropical storm force wind field is all to the south and the east because of that temporary wind shear. But eventually, the storm will continue to keep moving north. As it is, it's slowly accelerating, 8 miles an hour. Okay, so once it gets out into the Gulf, this is where it's gonna have its chance to strengthen. And it pretty much only has 1 day left to do it, right? Which is going to be Tuesday. Because once today is over, right, it's going to make its way, probably by tomorrow morning, it'll probably be out in the Gulf. But later today and overnight tonight, it'll be just exiting the Caribbean. And once it hits the eastern Gulf of Mexico, it's going to have to hit the ground running if it's going to strengthen. Because right now, the National Hurricane Center is predicting a Category 3 major hurricane. And we'll get in. The winds are 115 is what they're predicting. I'll get into a little bit more of a detailed version of this map in just a second. There are also now tropical storm watches pretty much from the Space Coast of Florida, I believe down like, Melbourne, and then going pretty much clear up to Jacksonville and Savannah, Georgia, right? So we're starting to see those tropical storm watches because once this storm grows, you might think, well, that's the East Coast of Florida. How could that be? Well, once the storm grows, right, it's going to come in like this, be a major hurricane. The wind field is already going to be like this. So tropical storm conditions will be felt even in towards, like Lakeland or Orlando. Of course, again, the East Coast of Florida, all are going to be, impacted by this because it's also going to cross the northern part of the state. But say when the storm gets right here, 7 p.m. Wednesday, it's still going to be a tropical storm, which means that wind field, right, will still be pretty big and will be probably included in this area. So it's going to come on shore, make a right-hand turn, pretty much go right up through Savannah, through Charleston, just south of Wilmington, North Carolina, and then kind of heading away from the shoreline. Although, do note that it does slow down, right? So here's 7 a.m. Wednesday, right? Here's 24 hours from that point, 7 a.m. Thursday. There's 24 hours from that point, 7 a.m. Friday, and then 7 a.m. Saturday. So it does pretty aggressively slow down. Good news is it'll be kind of offshore by the time it really slows down, because the storm is pretty much going to come to a stop sign basically at Bermuda and be like, okay, which way do I go next? And of course, that'll be figured out from there. But most likely, as of right now, not much land impacts after it leaves the Carolinas, right? So tropical storm force wind probabilities, we're actually going to go to most likely arrival time. I would say by earliest reasonable would be the time to be prepared. So for much of Cedar Key, Orlando, Melbourne, Florida, Jacksonville, I would say by late Tuesday have your stuff together. But by Wednesday, looks like late Tuesday, Wednesday morning will be when we feel those tropical storm force winds, and there's a high probability of that. Okay, especially across Florida and Georgia, and eventually into the Carolinas as well. So here's a detailed version of the first map I just showed you. You can see 115 mile/hour sustained winds with gusts to 140 as this thing comes on shore, and it's going to bring some real high storm surge here. So pretty much again, Apalachicola, Cedar Key, down to Tampa, St. Pete, right? That's where we're going to really have those effects, right? And again, those warnings do extend down to Sarasota as well. And then basically Port Charlotte on south to around Cape Coral, Fort Myers, Naples, right? That's where we have those tropical storm tropical storm warnings, and storm surge watches at the moment. All right, so here we look at the key messages. Again, flash and urban flooding, hurricane conditions are expected. And hurricane force winds are expected, of course, to go over far western Cuba today, along with some heavy rain. Inundation of 7 to 11 feet is expected. Now, I do think it could be actually a little bit higher than that, just because they had the same storm surge levels reported back when they were predicting it to be a Category 1. So I think it could actually exceed 12 feet in some spots. I would certainly not put that off. All right, but you can see, look at all this storm surge inundation. You can see right here. All right, this is, I believe Cedar Key is right in this region. But if we zoom in here, let's zoom in a little bit. You can see where that storm surge, even inland, I know it's probably like a couple or few miles, but that's really significant. Miles inland, when you got the ocean right here, is very significant, right? And of course, it could be assisted by some of these rivers as well, okay? Even all the way inland, we could see more than 1 foot of storm surge. Just imagine a foot of ocean water. Just, that's still very deep water. Okay, a foot of water is nothing. That's 12 inches. Okay, but greater than 9 feet anywhere in that red area. And then for Tampa, right? Let's go into Tampa and Clearwater here. Widespread areas of 3 to 6 feet. And then some localized orange, which means greater than 6 feet above, right? And why does this go inland? Again, because of these rivers. Ocean water is going to fill these rivers, right? The rivers are supposed to flow into the ocean, but then the ocean flows into the rivers. You get the right wind flow, and pretty much everything gets backed up, and the water just starts spilling everywhere and flooding, and that's what's going to be happening here, right? You can even see it for Clearwater as well. Okay, potentially 6 to 8 feet of storm surge, which is, again, that's taller than the average person. And then you got to add the rainwater on top of that, and it's just a bunch of other things. That's not going to be a pleasant sight, that is for sure. Okay, so here's a look at that map. Again, you can see from Osceola River, I'm sorry if I said that wrong, down to Shashahawas. I cannot say that. They make these names really hard to say here. But basically, I know Cedar Key is the one town I know that's right in the middle of that, and that's where you can see 7 to 11 feet of storm surge. Right, we go down towards Tampa Bay, 4 to 7 feet, even down southwestern Florida, 2 to 4 feet. Again, that's like half of the height of the average person. So it's still a very significant amount of water. And again, rainwater on top of that. And then towards Apalachicola, 2 to 4 feet of surge. Even towards not too far away or south of Savannah, 2 to 4 feet of surge. And even the northeastern coast of Florida, 1 to 3 feet, right? And maybe 1 to 2 feet for the dry Tortugas and the Florida Keys, which, again, not as significant, but still could certainly cause some issues. Here's Google Maps, right? Let's take a look again in at Tampa, just to emphasize what we're talking about here. So you can see, right, water flows into the Tampa Bay through here, comes into Tampa, it could maybe make it turn this way. So this water flows on shore, right? Because the hurricane, right, if we, I'll zoom out for just a second. The hurricane is going to be kind of coming up like this. So the wind will be coming in this direction. So when you have that, you're gonna have the water flowing into the Tampa Bay, all right, maybe into Old Tampa Bay, maybe the Hillsborough Bay, but then you're gonna have the water flowing up these rivers, and that's what I'm talking about because there's so many rivers that connect into Tampa. Not to mention the fact that it's a low-lying city, because of course it's a coastal city. So again, these are the things that we're talking about here that could really cause some issues here for the state of Florida, particularly here in Tampa. All right, and even as we head up towards, again, Cedar Key. I mean, you got Route 24, like the one route that just pretty much goes down Florida and then ends right at Cedar Key. I mean, this area is at risk a lot because it's basically little islands. Okay, and then that's it. All right, so really, I mean, gonna be worrying here about Cedar Key, especially. Now maybe if the center comes to the east, maybe we won't have as big of a surge threat. But if it comes into that Big Bend here between Apalachicola and Cedar Key, that's when we're going to have some real concerns for that region. And again, do not forget Lakeland, Orlando, Kissimmee, all these areas inland, Ocala, Daytona Beach on the coastline, Gainesville, and Jacksonville will all be in a threat from the system as well. So let's talk about the freshwater aspect now, rainwater. 2 to 4 inches has now been extended into Orlando and to Melbourne. I've been watching the past few National Hurricane Center updates, especially from yesterday, and now 2 to 4 inches has been extended into Orlando, with not too far away that 4 to 6 inch line. Tampa Bay here, 6 to 10 inches of rain. Again, this is just freshwater, widespread 4 to 6 up through Georgia and the Carolinas, and even Wilmington out to Cape Hatteras, 6 to 10 inches of rain, leading to a moderate, and I wouldn't even be surprised they added a high risk sooner or later, of that flash flooding threat. The only reason it's probably not higher for Florida is because they're used to rain, but still, I mean, a hurricane hits anywhere, there's going to be flooding. And that's what we're going to certainly see here. But even that slight risk, which I would say slight risk, whether you're talking about the severe weather on the Storm Prediction Center or the Weather Prediction Center talking about excessive rain, you have marginal, which is green on both websites. But once you get into that yellow, that's slight, that's when you should probably start really taking it seriously. And we'll see that inland, right? Because it's going to be merging with that stationary front. So we could be seeing some rainfall even falling inland as well. How about some model track guidance, right? Pretty well in agreement here, coming in towards Cedar Key, going off the coast, and then pretty much tracking in this direction, right? So models seem to be in good agreement on that. GEFS model tracks, you can see right here. GEPS, right, is more of a GFS variant, this is more the Canadian variant. Pretty much looking around the same thing here. All right, the only thing I'm slightly disagreeing with here on the models is the intensity that they have on it, because I think it could be, I mean, I pretty much said from the start that I was saying to myself, like, there's no way this will only be like a 70-mile-an-hour tropical storm, and then finally upgraded to a Category 1. I was like, this still doesn't seem right. When you look at the sea surface temperatures that are 88, and we're going to get into this in just a little bit, but very warm sea surface temperatures, very warm water even below the surface, dwindling wind shear, no dry air to be present. I just couldn't see it staying that weak. But we'll get into that in just a little bit. But still, a lot of the models now, majority I would say have it as a Cat 1, but a good chunk have it as a Cat 2, and a couple outliers, 1 or 2, make it a Category 3. But I do think that's pretty likely. Category 3 is certainly possible here over the next day or so. If we look at the recon they've been going through, of course, there's been other, like this one drop in MSLP and pressure. There was more back there, but since I've been refreshing it, they've kind of been moving on in their flight. I think this flight is most likely leaving now, if not almost about to leave. But you can see there was a spike to 60 knots, which is that's closer to 70 miles an hour probably than it is to 65, fairly converted to miles per hour. But there was a spike in the surface wind around the same time that the pressure dropped, which means I was probably near the center in that quote-unquote eye wall, even though it's not really formed yet. So that's what they're looking at right now. That's the Air Force flight. Again, you can see their flight right here. You can see, yeah, the winds are dwindling down because they're leaving the storm. I don't know if they're going to make one more pass. I think they're probably done. You see they've done a lot of flying around here, even picking up at flight level, not at surface, but at flight level. They picked up hurricane force winds between 64 and 83 knots here. All right, so you can see surface winds did not get quite that high, but you can see the rainfall rates also spiked around the same time, which means those strong surface winds were found inside of a thunderstorm, most likely bringing in a lot of rainfall. So that's what we're looking like here right now. I'm not sure the elevation of which these particular flights fly at. I know it's not like, I don't believe it's like passenger aircraft level, like 40,000 feet. I think it's somewhere around maybe 10,000 feet, but again, I don't quite know the number. But if you look here at the NOAA flight that has pretty much been gone for a while. I mean, it's back up in Miami at this point. You can see this was earlier, but they did find, of course, some very strong winds as well. They did not find 100 knots. That would be a Category 3. That was most likely, they just had like these random spikes and glitches sometimes. But I would say this is more what they found. But they found pressure down to 985 millibars. In the latest update, I believe it went up to 990s, but the wind speeds did not really move. So that's what we're looking like here for the aircraft reconnaissance data. Let's take a look here. Sea surface temperature is 86, 87 where it is right now, but as it moves north, notice 88 degrees Fahrenheit, 89 even as it comes into Florida. So this zone right here is where it's going to really get going, right? Because in the Caribbean, it's got a lot of that oceanic heat content, right? That very warm water below the surface that it can really tap into. But the Gulf of Mexico, like if, for example, the current that runs through here that connects to the Gulf Stream, right? Right in this region, there's high sea surface temperatures and high oceanic heat content, which is really what we're going to be really looking for here for rapid strengthening of the system. But once you get closer to the state of Florida, there will be still very high sea surface temperatures, 89, but a little bit dwindling on that heat content. And I'll show you that map in just a second. But without a doubt, we will have both very warm sea surface temperatures, borderline hot, and very warm oceanic, what we call the oceanic heat content, which means that water, how warm it is below the surface, which is more fuel for it to tap into. All right, so let's give this a little refresh here. All right, looks like it's about the same. There's Hurricane Franklin over there, by the way. I mean, my goodness, what a beast. Look at that beautiful eye. We take a look at the wind shear right now. Again, it's battling a little bit, but in general, it's all right. It's sitting in a lighter area of shear. There is some shear over here, but in the Eastern Gulf. But if you looked at this yesterday or 2 days ago, this was a lot stronger. So it's certainly dwindling, and it will continue to do so. All right, here's your upper level high pressure over here, by the way, keeping shear very low. If this was parked over, if this upper level high was parked over Idalia right now, we'd probably be looking at a hurricane already. But again, it will continue to strengthen as we head over the next day or so. Here's again another wind shear map. You can see where it's been dropping by 5+ knots, or almost 10. Right, this yellow was pretty much over here earlier. Now it's kind of dwindling a little bit. Again, and it will continue to dwindle as it's sitting in a pretty favorable area right now, and probably will continue to be favorable as it moves over the Gulf of Mexico. Here's the oceanic heat content. As I said before, there's pretty much where it's sitting right now, right in here. Very high heat content values, and it'll continue to be as it goes over the Gulf. But again, once it closes in on Florida, you can see in that northeastern part, it does drop off. But that doesn't mean the water is cold, and that's not going to make it weaken. I just think it's going to help it strengthen slower, but that doesn't mean that we will not see rapid intensification, especially up until that point, especially when it gets over that very warm water. All right. There's your precipitable water. There's Franklin, and look at all this moisture that Idalia is about to bring up, right? I mean, Franklin, yeah, it's a massive hurricane, and the winds are probably, of course, more than double the strength of Idalia, but Idalia comes from the Caribbean where we had really high heat content and really warm water, so that moisture is fueled. All right, so it pretty much has as much on the precipitable water as Franklin does, if not maybe slightly more. Even though Franklin is still a very strong hurricane over warm waters, I mean, Idalia, in terms of the moisture content, I would say matches it, at the very least. We take a look here at the GFS model. New 12Z model run shows 950 millibars of pressure, a very heavy rainfall as it makes its way onshore. All right, and you can see that moves up into Georgia and the Carolinas. So when it comes to the rest of the Florida Peninsula, right, basically anywhere not the Panhandle, there will still be moderate rainfall and tropical storm force winds. Okay, and also this doesn't show because it's a global model; it's not very high definition, but there will be bands that do come along on Tuesday for Central Florida. You can sort of see them, but they're not really shown as bands. You can see rainfall comes over Florida, right? I mean, after we get our daily thunderstorms as usual on Monday, those dwindle down by the morning. Here comes Tuesday. I mean, you can see rain from late Tuesday for the peninsula still going until possibly even Thursday, afternoon. And there could even be a front, the front that's striped along here that keeps the rain going over Florida and even maybe Louisiana, Mississippi at this point. That keeps it going for another day or so. Then, just, funnily enough, they have the low making a complete right-hand turn and coming right back into the eastern coast of Florida. Now is a much weaker low, of course, because when you start to move, when you have a low pressure moving in that direction in the northern hemisphere, it really messes with the rotation of the system, so it kind of starts to weaken. But still, coming in as a low pressure in the eastern Florida and bringing more rain into the peninsula and then bending back into New Orleans. So, yeah, this scenario looks very unlikely. All right, but again, that's just some example of some GFS insanity for you. I assure you by, maybe, who knows, maybe the GFS model's watching this video and they'll change their minds on the next one. Who knows? All right, but let's take a look at the HWRF model. Now, this is a pretty good, I wouldn't say for a track necessarily, but it's a pretty good intensity model to show you, how intense the storm will get. All right, well, here comes Idalia. Here's one of the bands. There's Tampa right over here. Well, this is Clearwater. Tampa's over here. And you can see these bands and the storm itself will be making their way north into Tuesday. And by Wednesday, there you go. All right, Tampa's off your screen at this point because the camera follows the storm. But you can see very heavy rain down there. Very heavy rain once it makes its way onshore. And at this landfall, Apalachicola is pretty much right in it. Cedar Key is right in it with the surge. I mean, everyone's just getting, fully walloped here by the storm system. Right, you can see there it is coming right onshore, moving up through Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and then kind of just making a right-hand turn and kind of leaving the coastline. All right, if we look at, let's take a look here at the European model. All right, this is the 6Z run. I'm surprised the 12Z actually isn't really out yet. All right, actually, if we could maybe go to ECVET. No. Okay, so yeah, Euro is not quite out yet for the 12Z model run, but you can still see 6Z model run here, the latest one available. You can see make kind of that landfalls right over Cedar Key, up through Savannah, up through Charleston. The low moves right over these areas, and then offshore. So this one, the Euro is pretty much dead on with what the National Hurricane Center is saying. I mean, that's pretty much its exact track, and making a right-hand turn off the coastline. Canadian model, how about that? Well, let's take a look. 12Z model run here, again, coming up through Cedar Key, also very similar to National Hurricane Center forecast. I would say definitely a lot more intense on the rainfall, that's for sure. Going through the Carolinas here, I mean, they have a wide path of 6+ inches of rain, and of course, in par with what the Hurricane Center is saying, because there will be a lot of rain from the system, that's for sure. All right, finally, the NAM model, let's take a look at it. You can see, again, pretty much in agreement with the HWRF. All right, coming in through there and then going out through Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina. So I'll say all these models have a pretty similar track, right? Coming up between Apalachicola and Cedar Key, going through southeast Georgia, up through South Carolina to some degree, and then near North Carolina, and then kind of going like this. All right, so that seems to be the most likely track as of now. I did kind of miss when they had the track going like this because, being in the Mid-Atlantic, I did want to at least kind of feel the remnants of this, but sadly that doesn't look like it. We'll see. Maybe once it gets off the coast, who knows? But I do think this will just make a right-hand turn and either just swirl around and dissipate or just absolutely just get kicked out to sea by the next trough or front that comes in. So that is it for this video. Of course, I'll be giving updates should anything major change with this system, but looking like a pretty solid threat for Florida, Georgia, South Carolina, and North Carolina. Maybe southeastern Virginia as well with some of the remnants. Thank you guys for watching. I am the Weather Dude signing off. Till next time, I'll catch you guys in the next video.